Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's breakout session around changing approach from risk management to impact. I'm supposed to let you all know that this is breakout session 2. We're going to be talking today around measuring worker voice and trying to measure what our impact is directly on workers. So a quick introduction. My name is Sophie Preisig. I work with the Sedex Stakeholder Forum. I've got an echo.
That's nice. We get to hear everything twice.
So I work with the Sedex Stakeholder Forum, which was previously the Associate Auditor Group. And about 2 years ago, that group looked at what they were up to and felt that they wanted to take on the challenge of looking at what beyond compliance looks like. So today I'm actually sat with a panel who in different forms and shapes have also taken on a very similar challenge. So for this session, we'd like to go through a couple of or investigate together some questions around how do we engage directly with workers to see if our efforts that we're making are actually having an impact on their lives directly. So we all kind of have some kind of code in some shape or form, whether it's a joint membership one around ETI, the Sustainable Development Goals. All of them specify in some shape or form that we want to improve the lives, and especially for our responsible sourcing sphere, the lives of workers within our supply chains. So as we've been making all these efforts, we would like to investigate how do we see whether all our audits, questionnaires, efforts for training capability building, supplier conferences, all the things that we've been doing over the past 10 years, have we asked, how do we know if we've had an impact for those workers' lives if we don't ask them, and at scale as well? And if we understand what's not working from them, what would work for them? So both elements of the spectrum. So for example, if we've put a lot of effort in the last 10 years into measuring systems to protect basic worker rights around compliance, but has this actually made a difference to their lives? Is that what's important to them? Are there elements that we don't know will make a difference for them? For example, migrant workers. Is it important for them to stay connected with their families, and therefore technology and Wi-Fi and access to communication tools is really important? So I'd like to investigate these kind of elements with my panel, and I'd like to ask them to quickly introduce themselves.
Hi there, my name's Clare Brown. I'm the Ethical Operations Manager for BBC Worldwide, so we're the commercial arm of public service. So Martine works for the company that owns us. But today I'm sitting here mainly as the work group leader for the work group that worked on Sedex's impact assessment tool.
Hi everyone, my name is Celine Gilart. I'm the head of social impact at Twinings here in the UK.
Hi, I'm Clare Flannery. I am the sustainability manager at AB-Inbev.
Fantastic. And with these 4 very different organizations, in particular, we'd like to look at, if we could speak to workers across our supply chain, how would we even start attempting to take on this channel? So before we go into questions to the panel, we'd like to take a quick poll from the room. And we'd like to ask you, has anyone here started measuring their impact that they've had on workers in their supply chain? Oh, sorry. It's on your apps. There's a little poll which should ping up. We're in breakout session 2. And if you could answer on behalf of you and your organization.
We didn't get that. Speaking of very tense.
Yeah.
I forget there's microphone.
All right, so we have some people in the room have already started, but the majority might be here to find out some ideas or investigate some ways of doing that. But the majority, this is a very new sphere. And I agree. I mean, I've definitely seen within the Sedex Stakeholder Forum that this is a very new area that we're kind of tiptoeing into. Can I start with you, Clare, as the SSF working group leader for the impact assessment? Can you tell us a little bit about the work of that group and the tool that they've come up with?
Sure. So the Worker Voice Impact Assessment Tool, as it is officially known, is a tool that is the result of collaborative work between the Sedex SSF and AIM Progress members. And we worked with Impact Limited, who probably many of you in the room are aware of, to develop a tool that will help us measure our impact, as it says in the title. The basics of the tool is that it's hung from what Impact refers to as its worker pie, and this is based on their 20 years of experience working with in 28 different countries of what they've found from those conversations, what workers really care about. And it's 3 areas that it's been broken down into. It's progression, respect, and safety in the workplace. So it is a fairly simple, straightforward 17-question survey that asks questions focusing on those 3 areas. As I've sort of talked about it as I've been working on it, to simplify, to give you an idea of what it is, it's basically a worker satisfaction survey. So it's the type of thing that we probably in most of our workplaces do on either an annual basis, monthly basis, or in my workplace it's a weekly basis. Yes, it's fun. And it's essentially assessing how they feel about their experience in their workplace in those 3 different areas. And then as part of that, there's also a framework that helps you then take that data and it breaks it down and helps you analyze it. And as part of the tool, you're able to break it down by gender, by contract type. So you can look at if permanent workers, temporary workers, if they feel differently about different issues, and also around the type of workforce. So whether it is a local workforce or a migrant workforce. And essentially what it does is it gives you a breakdown of how your workers feel on your site in those areas. And then the purpose of the tool is that you analyze that data and you look at how you can focus your work. So if, for example, your workers, one of the issues that they had was that they weren't able to save money, that's one of the questions that's asked, then probably a good use of your time would be going into that factory and helping the workers find ways that they can start saving money. And now it's probably very practical things like looking at how they're paid. There's also maybe some training for the workers, some help on getting them in contact with banking and stuff like that. And then what you do is you come back, as we all are, you come back and you do the survey again. And hopefully what you want to see as a result is that your work has changed some of those scores. So it's an ongoing process using the tool to help you really assess if the work that you're going in and doing is helping the workers, and also maybe if it's not, then what do you actually need to look at? And I think what's really brilliant about the tool is it really does put the worker back at the center of all the work that we're doing. It's asking them how they feel about where they work, what concerns they have in that workplace, and then it helps us target our work to help address their concerns rather than the concerns that we maybe assume that they're having or that maybe an audit has told us, which actually, for one reason or another, might not actually be that important to the workers in their workplace.
Thank you. And what drew you to first kind of champion that work that group was
I think
into?
it was putting the workers back at the center. I think we all often get distracted in what we're doing, getting audits and doing all the compliance stuff. And I think, we are always, as we were talking about here today, how do we get beyond compliance and beyond audit? And I think this tool does give us a way of doing that because it refocuses the discussion away from the compliance stuff. Obviously, I had to leave the debate early, so I don't know what the final result of it was. But I mean, I think we all agree that there is a place for compliance, there is a place health and safety for that auditing, for the audit. But it's how do we move beyond that? And I think this is a way because it's using a different way to assess our workplaces and also direct the work that we're doing.
Perfect, thank you. And Celine, I know that Twinings are very committed to having worker voice as integrated into their program as possible. How did you embark on this journey?
Yes, excuse me. Well, it all started, quite a while ago in the sense that quality is very important for us as a brand, but we see quality not just in terms of the quality of the product, but also the quality of life of the people involved in growing and producing the product all along the supply chain. So for us, having a part to play, or because we play a part in the life of people that may be growing tea in tea plantations in India or in Kenya or anywhere else, we thought that we may be able to influence, also we are a small player, we may be able to influence their conditions. But also obviously because tea is really important or essential to us, we really need strong and sustainable communities, so we have strong and sustainable supply chain, kind of makes sense. So that's why we really wanted to improve the life of people in our supply chain. And actually, most of the plantations we've been working with over decades all of them have been audited. Most of them are certified by third-party organization. But we knew that there's still conditions in various places that were not quite acceptable to us. And it wasn't so much down to the plantation very often, but it was because tea obviously is grown in very remote rural areas where often development indicators are quite low, so we had to do with issues around gender, access to sanitation, general poverty, poor housing conditions, and so on. Not across the board, but that was issues that we were encountering. So doing more audits or more certification wasn't necessarily something that was going to drive improvement, so we wanted to have a more holistic approach and looking at issues that are not necessarily covered by the audit program. So that's why we developed what we call a Twinings Community Needs Assessment, which is a tool we developed back in 2016, at the beginning of 2016. We developed it in-house, but we also developed it in consultation with expert organizations like UNICEF or WaterAid, Solidaridad, and so on. We really wanted to have this participatory approach. So the tool takes about 3 to 4 days to be conducted by Twinings managers in countries. And it's not looking at working practices because we continue with the audit, or there are other organizations doing audits anyway. So the labor standards like working hours, child labor, and so on should be covered, but it's looking at the priorities and the needs of the people in communities we are sourcing from. So then once we have this understanding, we can align our intervention or address their needs through our interventions.
Okay, great. And is it also a survey or a kind of...
So it's more, no, it's not a survey. So all people on the ground will go and discuss with lots and lots of people on the plantation, not just the workers, but their families. People who live on the plantations, the children, the elderly, anyone really, and so we cover 10 areas that include housing, access to water and sanitation, gender, livelihoods, health, nutrition, and few more, income, that kind of thing. And it's focus group discussions. It's one-to-one interviews, but it's not very formal. It's lots of discussion either in where the people live or in the field where they're plucking and so on. So it's quite a lengthy exercise because there are lots of people in some of these plantations, but we're not going to talk to everyone, but it's trying to get a sense through a broad spectrum of people how we...
Okay, brilliant. And then I'll just go on to Clare Flannery, who I know you were part of the pilot of the impact assessment tool, which Clare was speaking about. How did you start? How did you start practically in the field, going out, and what were the major challenges or experiences that you had?
So we had quite a number of challenges, mainly because this was the first time that we'd ever tried anything like using a worker voice tool in our supply chain. And we went in with quite a naive view, I think, and Lee, we worked with Anne Wider, and Lee will probably agree with me. We went in with, we thought, we engaged our suppliers, and we chose suppliers that we thought we had good relationships with, and we said, yeah, it's really easy. You just send us the mobile phone numbers of your staff, And we'll ask them some questions, we'll get the results. Yeah, it's all fine. It'll be really easy. And then we very quickly realized that suppliers started to ask us more questions about, well, how does this really work? And what information do you need? And when is this going to happen? And what about break times? And so we got Lee on the phone. And we were not sure what to do now. And so we went on quite a learning curve with our suppliers. I think we'd hoped to engage 5 suppliers in the pilot, which I know doesn't sound like a huge number. But what we found was there was so much hesitancy and resistance and nervousness around using a tool like this that we actually only ended up bringing 3 suppliers onto the program. And this is our experience. I think what we don't know is whether that's because there's a lack of trust between ABI and our suppliers. We have done some surveys, so we know that we do have some issues around that. And that's something that we want to look into in more detail. But slowly, with more conversations and guiding suppliers through the process, they started to understand why we were doing this. We started it because we were doing some targeted training with our suppliers, and we wanted to understand, does it actually make a difference? Is our training effective? And is it getting through to the people at the facilities where we're really targeting? And so even throughout the process, I think we've had quite a range of responses, and one supplier in particular who's been super engaged, really interested in the results and wanting to understand how they can apply it into their operations. So I would say while our sample is small, we do have quite a mixed range of experience. And so if anything, I think it's that engagement piece and the communication that we've really learnt a lot about. But I think, we do recognise that it holds a lot of potential. And I think, a couple of our suppliers certainly recognise the same as well.
Mm. And I know that the impact assessment tool covers lots of different collection methods. Which collection methods did you trial as part of your pilot? Was it was mobile survey provider?
Yeah, so the example I was just talking about was through the mobile survey provider. We did also test a few sort of more rough and ready versions where we used paper survey that we sent out, and it was really quite... the results were just perfect. I mean, everything was extremely positive. Before the training, after the training, things got even better. But with the worker voice, we did get more, what we feel is a more realistic response from workers. And what we saw, so we've now done 2 call cycles, and what we've seen is the number of people that have been sending in their phone numbers and actually picking up the phone and answering the questions has increased.
Okay, so
which
the
is great.
response rate as well has increased.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And for you, Celine, because I think your needs assessment is more face-to-face and in discussion and in workers' lives.
Yeah.
What did you experience similar challenges when you were first trying this out and kind of experimenting with it?
Yeah, obviously it was a new approach. So for producer and yes, for the producer we were working with, we had to kind of convince them of the change of approach and the need to do something else, because obviously they're getting audits, they're getting certification, so there was something else that they had to deal with. So obviously it's a bit of convincing there. But it's also telling them that this is not just us coming and kind of doing a tick-in-the-box exercise and leaving them with a long list of non-conformance, but we wanted it to be very collaborative, so we were going to talk to their workers or the communities on their estates, but then hopefully the findings will be useful for them as well. So we are sharing everything confidentially or anonymously with the producer, so then they can address. If anything needs to be addressed, they can do it themselves as well. So it's not just us telling them what to do, but it's just telling them that's the good thing, that's the not so good things. And so yes, I think it's kind of showing them that we are in it together, because it's our supply chain, but it's their workers. But it was also showing them that we are serious about driving impact or doing our bit to improve conditions. So it's not just getting another audit and hearing from the workers and then nothing happens. So it's still work in progress. We have projects on the ground. We are working as much as we can with producers to drive that. But I think it's really showing and having this discussion with them, so it's not leaving them on their own, or it's not just creating an additional burden just for kind of a tick in the box, but it's really using that information that we are gathering through our community needs assessment and driving change on the ground.
Mm-hmm. And can I ask, just before we move on to the other next question, was there anything that kind of really shone out when you looked at the results of what was coming back from workers? Was there anything that really surprised you or kind of came out in particular from the results, or from what they were saying?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I think some of the findings is actually not news. I mean, we knew that housing in some places wasn't great, or we knew it was issues around gender in some other cases. So not just us, but it was also like reports from NGOs or government data about it. So it's just, we're not finding like unique data and like, but at the same time, it's kind of like confirming that these issues are there and that they need to be addressed. But at the same time, what we found really useful is kind of hearing from the workers, and the workers or the communities being very engaged. Lots of producers and management being quite positive as well with the finding and the whole process. So yeah, I think that was the kind of the positive finding as well. It's just even some trade union members that say, no one ever asked me. I see the auditors, but they don't talk to me. Workers as well. So it's just giving them a chance to kind of tell us about their needs, but also their priorities. Because yes, working hours may be a priority for us, but actually, if the people can't feed their family because there is a drought and therefore no food available, it's just like, well, maybe it's more important to them than actually doing a bit more, working a bit more. So it's just kind of putting everything into perspective, which was very useful to us.
Sorry, can I just jump in here as well?
Sure.
Just because, just also talk a bit about what my two colleagues here have discussed, that it is some of the concerns that have been raised around it, I think, is stuff that has come up as we've piloted the project. And especially one about, just because the one about all the answers coming back, everything's hunky-dory and it's all great here, is something that often people raise as concerns when we're talking about this. And I think what the conversation we had yesterday at the SSF, what really came out of that, of some of the other people who trialed it, as well as some of the mobile survey providers who obviously have an incredible amount of experience in this, is that, to be perfectly honest, that is often how these things begin, because often we're dealing with people who have been told to say the right things, right? Especially, let's say, like factories, for example, in China, where we all know that, when they're questioned during an audit, they know the answers to give and they know what they're supposed to answer. But actually, as you use this tool, you build trust with the workers, and actually you start finding that that your answers become more honest, even if they're not at the beginning. So that, because as they see, there is actual outcomes from, from maybe the little bit of honesty that you found in it. Actually, maybe now if I do raise this as an issue, they will come and help on this. And I think I remember actually I'm having a flashback now, from the mobile survey panel last year, that actually something that often happened is you have quite good results, and then you might find that your results actually plummet, because all of a sudden you actually now are getting the actual answers. So everything seems fine, you do the work, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, everything's gone wrong. And actually what's gone wrong is actually a good thing, and everybody's actually telling you the truth now. So actually you can then start really doing the work at that. So it just takes, so it is a scary thought. I think a lot of people think, they're just going to say everything's fine, and because that's what they've been told to say. But actually, if you keep using it and you keep working with them, you'll find that actually you get the honest answers out of it.
Yeah. And I know, looking at some of the results as well, I don't know, what impressed me personally very much was actually that workers really just wanted to be heard. Most of the time, I looked at the kind of common theme across the big data, it's just being heard. They had ideas, and those voices weren't always. They wanted an avenue where they were relevant and had a voice almost. But yeah, I'm not sure if that came out in your particular pilots as well, or if there was anything other Was there anything else in particular that came out for you guys?
I think so. Not directly related to this pilot, but I think it's still quite relevant because it's engaging workers in our own facilities and also with our suppliers. So we have a sort of a lean manufacturing program that we have, and one of the tools that's used is a worker survey that's sent to everyone. We've actually included some of the questions that have been put together from the impact pilot, and then a focus group during the site visit. And one of the things that has come through quite strongly in both our internal organisation and in supplier facilities is communication is just a really big frustration for people who are working there. We hear quite a lot that if only their supervisors were on the floor more instead of meetings, they want to take pride in what they do and they can't resolve problems because the supervisor doesn't listen to them or isn't there, or they're not given the responsibility or the respect to be able to take decisions for themselves. So we do find that kind of resonates quite well when we speak to workers directly.
Absolutely. So we've got two more questions about what the future might look like, but before we go into those, are there any questions from the floor to the panel or myself? Got a question up here? Got a mic coming if you want.
I just want to ask how the outcomes or any outcomes of these surveys have been communicated back to the workforce, and especially in cases where there was a particular issue which maybe there wasn't an easy solution to, how that inability to react to opinion was communicated, if that's come up at all.
I think for us, we need to be really careful when we ask people about their life, that we are not raising expectation that we're going to fix everything, because that's not, obviously we have some funds and we can do some projects, but it's not just about that. So it's understanding their needs and their priorities and see where we can have a leverage, but being very careful that we are not going to fix everything. So if there is something where we feel, like an issue where we feel we can have an influence, either ourselves directly or working with others, or because we have a previous expertise in this area, either in country or on this topic, we will try to do something to drive improvement on the ground. We will also kind of call on producers to do their bits, and also working with, so we work with the like of UNICEF or Save the Children, lots and lots of organizations, BSR, which is also at the conference today, to also support their effort on advocacy. So it's not, sometimes this morning a speaker was talking about the root causes, so not everything you can fix. There are some improvement that are quite tangible at the estate level, but some of the things it's more about root causes, and so it's important to also support advocacy effort, and sometimes as Twinings we can't go to the Indian government or Kenyan government to talk. So it's just kind of going through this organization or going within with other companies and so on to try to address these issues in a more sustainable way as well.
So all kind of about managing expectations as well, and kind of setting it up for success, and that it does meet their needs, but also what they're expecting. Yeah, and looking at the root causes, so it's not just do kind of isolated project, but also kind of create some sustainable approach. Yeah. Perfect. Anything you'd like to add from your experience, Claire?
I think it's something that we're still learning about. We've been quite careful where we've been using the worker voice, the mobile tool itself. We were quite clear up front with our suppliers that this wasn't something that was going to impact their commercial relationship with us. That said, it still created a lot of anxiety around whether we were going to use this as a big stick and then start to either drop our volumes or move away from the supplier and things. So we've been quite cautious in terms of how do we then go back and engage with the suppliers. So after each call cycle, of which we've had 2 so far, and then we're going to do a 3rd, we've had conversations with the suppliers to understand how they've interpreted the results. We haven't yet got to the point where we're sort of asking them to hold their own focus groups to dig deeper into what's really driving the issues. But we do want to get to that point. But we're sort of in this balancing act between creating the level of trust that we need with the suppliers to then have those meaningful conversations with them.
Can I just, I just want to speak to one point that Clare just raised as well, because it did come up yesterday in some of in the breakout sessions we had at the SSF, which is about the big stick comment, because I think it's really important that if you want to engage with this tool as a brand or retailer, or if you're a Sedex A member, that it doesn't just become another big stick that you use to chase after your suppliers and start ranking things as non-compliances, and it's like, oh, well, you scored badly on this area, go fix it. That's not what this tool is meant to be. It's meant to be a way to engage your supplier or your factory, engage with your workforce and work with them. You know, again, it's all that we're all talking about here. It's not just another way to sort of punish our suppliers. It's a way to try to actually find to work with them and support their workforce, just because that did come up as a big concern in conversations yesterday. So please, if you do want to use this, don't use it in that way, because that just goes against the spirit of it.
And I guess probably some context which will help for the room is the questions are very much around how do they feel respected, how do they feel safe, how do they feel that there's opportunities for progression income. It's not a compliance-based tool.
It's not. It's that is what's interesting about it. And one of the things, other feedback we've had about also around the honesty to it is that because the questions are very different in our specific tool, it does sometimes throw workers a little onto a loop because it's not what they're used to being asked. And often when you ask them a question they're not used to being asked, you're going to get a more honest answer to it because they don't have the prescribed answer to that question. So they feel they'll just answer what is the honest answer. And I know my experience of having accompanied audits, which were maybe run slightly more holistically, where the questioning was done outside of the norm, you do really see that. You see a more honest answer coming from workers because actually we haven't asked them do you get your benefits paid correctly? The usual standard questions.
Great. Are there any other questions from the floor that you'd like to pose? Yeah, perfect.
Hi, good afternoon. Gal from PepsiCo. Claire, a question to you, Claire, and eventually to you as well, Celine. In the world of many different competing priorities in very busy agendas, I'm not trying to be a devil's advocate, but I'm very curious to understand how did you get internal stakeholder engagement to go and run such a piece of work that eventually at the short term doesn't really bring a lot of value to the management?
So that's a really good question. And actually, one of the reasons that we wanted to get involved with the project was because our senior leadership kept on asking, so what is the value? Show me in numbers what these programs mean. So other than the sort of inputs and outputs that we could provide to them in terms of these are the numbers of suppliers that have gone through for an audit, these are the numbers of non-compliance disclosed, we didn't really have anything meaningful that we could use for impact. So they were actually, in our case at least, they were sort of driving the conversation. So we didn't have to get that same level of endorsement for the pilot. I think perhaps if we want to scale this beyond being a pilot, then we will have to have some more conversations because the budget is going to look really different. So, yeah.
Okay. So we've got a couple of questions up here which have come through, on the application. Got you. So, Claire, you mentioned the tool you use for your workers, but what about the workers in your supply chain? Sorry, I should probably... the worker survey tool that you did, was that on your own sites or that you did with suppliers' sites?
The mobile phone pilot that we did was with our contractors in our own facilities. The paper versions we used in our supplier facilities. The main reason that we focused on contractors was because myself, I sit in procurement, and contract group for us to get in touch with, really. So it seemed like a sort of an agile way of being able to reach those people.
Yeah.
But we would think about using it elsewhere in the supply chain. It's just that was our opportunity.
Yep. Okay. And then, is the Sedex Impact Assessment tool now live on the system? So I believe it's being launched with a new e-learning platform, which will be in the next week, 2 weeks, next week. So.
And just as part of that, there's the framework forms part of that, the questionnaire forms part of that, and then there's also a guidance on it to help. So it discusses the different ways that you can use it, and also guidance around some of the questions that have been coming up here about, how to introduce it, and so that will all be available.
Yes, it will. And then, how can small buyers and small companies strive for the same level of impact in their supply communities? So, I think I understand. So like a multinational may have a much wider reach of impact than a smaller community. But I don't know, my experience though has been a smaller community can do much more depth work, which a big multinational scale of impact can't. It has to do the scale, not the...
Yeah, and I think just to add on that, Sophie,
Sure.
it's probably like prioritizing like where you want to have an impact. So it's not like, even Twinings, we're big, but we're not that big. And we don't do this community needs assessment across all our supply chain. We look at tea and herbs at the moment. We don't look, for packaging, we still use audits and stuff because we don't feel that we can have the same impact with other suppliers than we can have with tea and herb suppliers.
Yeah.
So I think that it's probably the same for you if you're a smaller company. It's just like see where you can really have an impact and drive change instead of just doing a blanket approach across everything.
Yeah. Okay, and then I'll go to the last question. Is there genuine factory owner enthusiasm to workers' engagement on a direct basis, or is there a temptation to pay lip service? If not, how does a customer sell in worker-centric engagement?
I don't mind addressing, I can speak to the second half of that question, which
Sure.
is looking at how to sort of maybe get some engagement with it. I think, very quickly I will address that, I think the fact is that, I think something we're all aware of is that a happy workforce is a stable workforce, which obviously will improve productivity, efficiency, and all that type of good stuff in your factory. And it's probably a steep learning curve, but if you can communicate that if you can get these information from your workers and address them and make them happier where they are, you're less likely for them to leave. You're less likely to have high levels of absenteeism, which will obviously improve the situation in the factory. It's sort of like the capability building where we look at efficiency. To keep the workforce there, that's going to significantly help improve that as well.
Perfect. And then just before got one more question? Oh yeah, sure.
Hello.
Oh, sorry, and we have one at the back, and I did promise at the back first. So maybe we'll do that.
Hi, this is Linda Berries from CP Foods.
Hello.
I'm interested to know the sample size for the worker programme, whether it's by paper or app or phone, in terms of the number of workers that are engaged, and how reliable that data is when measuring year-on-year performance improvement.
So I think it's around, is it 60%?
So the guidance around using the tools is the 60% is that you want to look at surveying 60% of your workforce. So it's a higher number than, for example, you would have in a standard audit. I think on maybe some of the other questions, I think it's still very early in the process to maybe answer some of that. We need to get a bit more information and data on it. But that's, I don't know if either of you do.
Yeah, in using the mobile technology, we still wouldn't be at hitting that kind of 60% rate. We've still got quite a long way to go to get people to want to engage with it or sort of feel that they can engage with it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then I'll take one more question.
Hi.
Leah.
Thank you, Sophie. Lee Esterhazen from Endwider. I had the privilege we had the privilege of working with ABI on that in progress and Sedex pilot. I wanted to actually, forgive me, but just to add a little bit of insight from our side is that the suppliers need to build their trust as much as workers do, and a lot of effort is invested in doing that. And one way is to is to demonstrate to the supplier the commercial benefits of worker engagement. And we do that with a productivity call or a means of gathering data from the workers about small adjustments that can be made to up productivity, and we've done that. That's always more possible outside of pilots because of the time constraints. But the other thing I wanted to say is that the risk with piloting is that essentially suppliers build their trust iteratively, and so do workers. And with short pilots where there's one or often one call cycle, you don't build that trust.
Yeah.
And suppliers tend to help each other to trust the system more by starting to share experiences. So it's good to know, for the rest of you out there, if you want to try direct worker reporting, to bear in mind that that this trust mechanism takes time, and use the suppliers who've already been on the system to chat to others and allow workers to see how it works in other workplaces. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, and I think that what struck me was like actually the thing that came out of the pilot where workers really wanted to be heard was often small things about making a production line a little bit more effective and kind of like small little unique things like that, rather than necessarily, I think there's a big fear that it's going to be all about money, but that surprised me. It was more important than what I expected. So just before we go to the break, a quick note or little snippets of ideas from this panel on what do you think the next kind of phase of and sets of challenges are going to be for what direct worker reporting?
I think from my point of view, and I know from the Sedex, the working group point of view, it is to get people to try to use the tool. Because it is, we know it's a new thing and it can be a very scary thing. But I think what we need as many people as possible to engage with the tool and then feedback on it so that we can make it even better. So I think I would encourage, if anybody's thinking about doing any kind of worker voice work or in their sites, to consider using this option, because I think it can maybe give you more benefit than just a one-off survey. It can help focus your work where it's needed in the site, and hopefully address some of the issues that are really of concern to your workers, and then also gives you the tools to go back in and measure that and see if you have done it and if there's another area that you need to look at.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, from perspective, and just I think to add on what Claire said, it's making sure you're measuring impact about what you're doing. So the worker's voice is just a tool to drive impact and improvement. It's not, the goal is not to gather, I think, the worker's voice. It's just to improve their life. So it's just how you then measure impact over time by doing more community needs assessment or more survey like the one you just described. So then you can demonstrate this improvement and this impact on the life of the workers.
Fantastic. And okay.
Yeah, I think 2 points from my side. One is making sure that it's a continual evolution of the questions. We found in our experience some of the questions didn't quite fit for contractors and caused a bit of confusion, and we had feedback from our suppliers on that. So just to make sure that kind of review process continues, and I think as more people adopt it, that will happen naturally. And then I think the second phase, more around sort of development and where this is going. We're thinking at the moment, we're trying to, think about how we integrate it better into our processes. So in our supplier development work that we do as a way of understanding progress over time, coupled with the sort of support mechanisms that we provide as well, and making sure that when we develop suppliers through operational productivity, etc., that there is a people focus in that as well. So coupling those two, I think, is an area we want to explore.
Just one last thing, just also for our Sedex members and the tool, I think it's also important to highlight the fact that the next phase for this project, now that we've sort of established the initial tool, is to look at how it's going to actually be incorporated into the Sedex platform itself, so that as a Sedex member, you're able to use it and access the information through that platform, as not just, currently it is an offline tool, but the next step for it is to incorporate it into the Sedex platform.
This is true. Fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. If you do have any more questions, we are breaking for tea and coffees now. But you're more than welcome to come and see any three of us 4 of us break. Thank you very much.
Thank you.